If you're here from our first video on the Watch Dogs series, you already know what's going on with our look at the sequel. But if not, I humbly suggest going back and taking a look at our first entry. The Watch Dogs 2 dev team's mission was simple: realize the grand hacker power fantasy the first game was marketed as, and establish a unique voice for the franchise in order to distinguish it from the usual Ubisoft fare.
This is happening? It's really happening?
In my opinion, this has proven to be something of a double-edged sword, but nonetheless the one that cuts the deepest out of the series, for better or for worse. Much like the game, we'll waste no time in jumping into the opening. In Watch Dogs 2, we occupy the scuffed Doc Martens of one Marcus Holloway, the idealistic and playful wunderkind counterpoint to the aloof, mature, and psychologically warped Aiden Pierce. Marcus burglarizes one of the recently implemented CTOS server farms just outside San Francisco in order to expunge his online profile and minor criminal record from Bloom's systems. This process is also an initiation ritual that will finalize his induction into a local cell of the hacktivist collective occasionally mentioned in the first game, known as ExpSec.
ExpSec will give you the truth. Do what you will.
Armed with only a taser, a weird little weight-bundled paracord, his phone, and his laptop, he has to do this all by his little self, and he's more than capable enough to pull it off.
Oh god, oh god!
Once in the system, Marcus is very disturbed by what Bloom knows about him. His recent purchases, his latest searches, his misdemeanors, his private entertainment habits, absolutely everything he could imagine and even more that he couldn't. All the better to delete it, but most people don't get the choice Marcus just made, a thought that weighs on his mind now that he's become a ghost in the system and a newly christened member of ExpSec. Message received, Ubisoft. Apart from the chill in my spine, the welcome to Watch Dogs 2 is a warm one indeed. Within half an hour, Watch Dogs 2 has addressed some of the central issues cited by many critics of the original game, including some of our own. Its gameplay is now laser-focused on the hacker fantasy, and Bloom, along with its collaborators, is squarely in the crosshairs of our heroes for a change. Let's start with the changes made to the gameplay formula that brought us the Hackerman simulator the first game only promised. First up, controls. Watch Dogs 2's revisions to the hack interface include a held menu with quick shortcuts to multiple interactions with most electronic objects in the game. There's also a quick hack option to simply tap the button for fast access to the hack the player is most likely to use on short notice. For example, potentially explosive electric boxes can still be triggered to blow up remotely, but now they can also be rigged with a proximity sensor and even a sound lure, all from the same quick access menu in real time. The improvements to controls give easier access to hacks and more options at once, and remove the barriers between the player and hacking as often as possible. What specifically makes Marcus unique from Pierce is that he's delicate and ill-suited for combat. Doesn't mean he can't fight. There's arguably too many ways the game accommodates heavy use of firearms, melee takedowns, and explosives, but generally Marcus is designed to coax players into the thoughtful tactics the game is trying to facilitate in as natural a way as possible. Another new feature is Nethack, a kind of X-ray vision overlay that lets you see hackables like cameras straight through walls. This helps players more easily snoop around enemy networks and plan a deft infiltration strategy at minimal risk. Now, let's meet the Jumper and the Quadcopter, your partners in power by proxy. The Jumper can quickly roll through tight spaces, and even meets the requirements for the majority of hack objectives that require physically touching the hacking target. The Quadcopter is an eye-in-the-sky scouting tool that can scope out targets from all angles, and it's also nice for solving hacking puzzles. Eventually, the player can rig their RC minions to distract enemies with noise, or even drop taser charges and remote explosives, and take out enemies from relative safety. Utilities like forklifts can also be remotely controlled, and nearby cars can be hacked to suddenly move in various directions, even when driving at full speed. If you want to cover a car with explosives, raise the gate on an enemy outpost, then force the car to drive inside and go boom, it's a quick and easy job. You can disable security systems remotely with some upgrades, and the triumphant return of blackouts allows a lengthy shutdown of every bit of security, as well as the lights, in the area, for easy entry and exit. is the game's impressive witness system making it quite the task to find and silence everyone trying to call the police or reinforcements? Mass distract your atrocities away by forcing everyone nearby onto the front page of Fur Affinity, or set enemy headsets to the deafen setting. Watch Dogs 2 consistently makes hacking the most expedient and readily available solution to most problems, ensuring that more players will be drawn towards what was ostensibly the main point of the franchise's gameplay. Here come the trade-offs. In addition to having glass bones and paper skin, Marcus has no way of slowing down time to help make accurate shots, and his arsenal is limited to 2 guns and a taser. The taser is your only method of silent ranged takedowns when suppressed weapons are no longer an option, and tased enemies will wake up after a few minutes. It's clear steps have been taken to make John Wick-style shootouts with lethal weapons a more difficult solution to most problems. Well, as long as you pretend the grenade launcher isn't in the game anyway. Where things start to get rocky is that Watch Dogs 2 doesn't follow all the way through with some of the riskier choices presented when transitioning into this style of gameplay. Regenerating health, plentiful ammo, and a sluggish difficulty curve feel like concessions made to avoid putting off general audiences, who still probably want to play a Grand Theft Auto game instead. Killing enemies is effectively no different from knocking them out. What incentive there is to preserve life boils down to convenience. The taser has unlimited ammo, and its slot in your weapon inventory is fixed. Melee takedowns retain their perfect effectiveness all the way to the credits. Making bloodthirsty gamers excited to pursue non-lethal Hackerman stealth is the goal. So could somebody tell me why on earth this game includes over 30 definitely lethal firearms to choose from? I find it just a little bit jarring that ExpSec builds military-grade weaponry with bedazzled 3D printers while posturing as a pacifistic faction.
This is the army of printers. It is capable of pumping out an arsenal of lethal weapons down.
Seriously?
Yep. Once you master it, voila! Hipster Merchant of Death.
The taser, hackable objects, zappers, and melee knockouts are the dedicated non-lethal gameplay tools Marcus gets, at least outside of a handful of similar offerings from a concerning amount of paid DLC. Why am I so bothered about this? Because Watch Dogs 2 proves that its hacking systems can confidently carry the game in missions that don't feature combat at all, like the smart home infiltration. Suddenly we're in a puzzling level design encouraging us to think outside the box with our myriad tools to solve navigational problems, like we've just stumbled into Jindosh's Clockwork Mansion from Dishonored 2. It's like getting peanut butter in my chocolate. More, please. I think one of the most daring things any modern game can do, in the AAA League especially, is interacting with the world without violence. Watch Dogs 2 is the rare, highly produced game that at least flirts with that risk. Completing the game without killing anyone is a cool achievement, and suggests the attitude of the design is similar to that of lauded immersive sims like Deus Ex and Dishonored, but doing the inverse in Watch Dogs 2 and shooting up every enemy you encounter means little, since the gameplay, and more concerningly the story, simply doesn't seem to care. There's some points about the tone I want to make, but that'll take a little bit of context. I'll need to summarize the plot really quick, so if you don't want to follow me into Spoiler Town, then just go play the game and come back in a week or so. Have some fun. Maybe leave a comment before you leave, for me. Following Marcus's recruitment into the San Francisco ExpSec cell, the crew embarks on a PR campaign to gain public support against Bloom and its collaborators. Unbeknownst to them, Bloom's CTO and the man in charge of CTOS, Dusan Nemec, is manipulating ExpSec's internet presence for the purpose of rapidly escalating the scale of their actions and hence scaring the other corporations in Silicon Valley into accepting an even more invasive version of CTOS to protect themselves.
This the part where you offer me a 6-figure salary?
No, fuck no. No.
After achieving popularity with some big wins, Marcus is promptly kicked out of the system with his identity exposed.
It's okay. I was done with it anyway.
In exile from the Valley, they encounter the fugitive CTOS architect and hacker legend Raymond T-Bone Kenny from the first game, who explains the concept of the Bellwether.
Bellwether program is control. It's like a Orwell husband double punch. Profiling, Media manipulation, corporate collusion, consumerism, all driven by predictive algorithms.
DedSec returns to the Bay and one by one sabotages every major corporation in San Fran, from a popular search engine to an aerospace developer.
You think I can officially put rocket scientist on my resume now?
What do I look like, a career counselor?
Even flushing out some corrupt FBI agents in the process, until only Bloom remains to conquer. After DedSec installs a backdoor in a globally networked CTOS satellite system, Dushan's role in rigging an election, as well as his bid for power around the world, is exposed, leading to his peaceful arrest. DedSec resolves to keep fighting anyone who tries to exploit the online world for their own gain, as like-minded activists start appearing around the world. With that covered, onto tone. What made the tone of Watch Dogs 1 feel appropriate, if a bit dry, was that the player understood that Pierce's actions in exploiting CTOS to pursue his goals were extreme by nature, and the game doesn't make excuses for him. It was up to the player how far past the line Pierce would walk, and however flawed the morality system was, its presence at least established a perception in the player that their actions were under scrutiny. At best, Pierce is a controversial but helpful force in the public eye, and public enemy number one at his worst. He remains as ambiguous as a figure like the Fox probably would be in the real world. Watch Dogs 2 chose to step away from heavy themes in favor of a more playful and lighthearted tone, featuring youthful and idealistic protagonists waging populist war with Silicon Valley giants using backyard gadgetry and dumb pop culture jokes.
Nobody's gotten that far. This is like the secret cow level.
They're vulnerable cast-offs of modern society, unfairly profiled by CTOS, with their potential to contribute to the world either held back or suppressed entirely by the power of the system. The narrative focus is on holding responsible those who exploit the public via CTOS, and not only exposing, but humiliating them.
Why me? Come on! I'm a good guy! It's just business! I got shareholders, bitches!
It's all quite in line with real-life hacktivist MO, as this is a story at least trying to align itself with reality, except when it isn't.
No!
We've been over how Marcus's aversion to murder means nothing when the player can and will do whatever they want, but even the rest of DedSec is morally inconsistent in the game's narrative. Of the crew, Wrench is the example worth talking about.
The needs of the many.
Though it does bear mentioning that I really like Josh, since he at least tries to take things seriously.
I loved your frat house hat. Real talk.
Thanks.
And Satara and Horatio contribute something, but Wrench is the distinguished highlight. He's at his best when DedSec is up to hacker mischief meant to expand their popularity, particularly some of the early game publicity stunts. Stealing a prop car and rigging it to be driven remotely at blistering speeds was when the DedSec crew won me over. DedSec's actions are framed to be on a spectrum between nearly innocent dumb fun and karmic justice, and the game's light tone stays believable when this remains consistent. When it doesn't, the happy-go-lucky framing is betrayed by actions that are hard to see in a positive light, even if the game insists we do just that. As an example, Wrench is the first to suggest solutions that are unambiguously acts of domestic terror, with the same general attitude he has towards the gang's standard comic mischief.
So what's the fix?
Sledgehammers and fire. No! Sledgehammers on fire. Oh, sorry.
At one point of the game, he personally launches an explosive assault on a Bloom facility, seemingly unbothered by the level of violence he's committing.
Marcus, I came. I saw. I blew shit up. I came again.
To make matters worse, the entire group is party to some very questionable actions that go unquestioned. In response to rival hackers publishing the identities of DedSec operatives in an online practice called doxing, the gang tricks their opposition into doxing themselves. Karmic, yes, but doxing is a very real thing, and a substantial source of anxiety for those of us who work online in the public eye. It inevitably leads to the harassment and potential endangerment to family, friends, and often people totally uninvolved with the doxing target. The issue compounds with a related online tactic of swatting, when DedSec sicks a SWAT team on a streamer who is damaging their public image. In reality, swatting is not only a waste of public resources, but in some cases has led to the deaths of swatting victims, and even people completely unrelated to the intended target. It's a strangely weighty choice for what amounts to a goofy punchline in a side mission.
This guy, fuck. He's like the avatar of everything that sucks about the internet.
Worst of all, Watch Dogs 2 forgets the significance of the franchise's own backstory. The silver bullet to DedSec's artificial sense of moral superiority is an event late in the game that results in the deliberate shutdown of the entire power grid of Seoul, South Korea, an action taken because it was in the way of DedSec's goal. A similar event was caused by T-Bone in the game's timeline back in 2003. His actions resulted in the accidental deaths of 13 people, which had dramatic consequences for T-Bone's life and laid the groundwork for the modern implementation of CTOS in the first place.
Looks like the douche has made you a federal problem. Welcome to the club, amigo.
To knowingly repeat this incident on a larger scale with the very same man in the room encouraging DedSec to do it is more than a little hypocritical.
I'm not the bad guy here, Satar.
I find this so frustrating because the game comes within inches of nailing the level of moral ambiguity the premise of Watch Dogs makes possible. Early on, Dushan makes a frightening amount of sense.
The people want to be told who is good and who is bad. They don't care how it works, only that it does.
Unfortunately, Dushan suffers a terminal case of impotent villain syndrome.
Jesus Christ, don't yell in my fucking ear.
His early success against DedSec is the biggest win he manages, and it's hardly a stumbling block for Marcus and the gang.
No fucking punch.
The story doesn't even respect him enough to credit him with the one casualty DedSec's ranks suffer. Dushan is clearly the most powerful character in the story, yet he does virtually nothing to prevent his own fate, as the other corporations fall and the walls close in around him. It's so ridiculous that I don't think there's a logical explanation for it. Despite being set in the real world following a premise awash with all the shades of gray that come with our reality, Watch Dogs 2's narrative is haunted by a narrowly black and white form of morality. The good guys are always good, and whatever happens to the bad guys doesn't matter because they had it coming anyway. I'm not trying to say this choice of tone is inherently bad. A light, incredibly silly tone is an essential part. A light, incredibly silly tone is an essential part of the unique appeal of games like the latter Saints Row entries.
The last time a big naked dude said he could help me, it did not end well.
It's all part of the experience in a heavily exaggerated spoof of reality where dumb, chaotic, open-world crime simulator fun is encouraged to be taken to extremes and beyond. For an example of how to mix contrasting moods, the Persona games have mastered tone juggling.
For real?
They deal quite deftly with heavy psychological themes and character moments in a fun and colorful environment saturated with personality, and following the daily ups and downs of normal and abnormal life. Watch Dogs has always had the benefit of an inspired choice of setting, taking place in the mirror we look into when we wake up and see the world for what it very well could be, and for some places already is. My wish for Watch Dogs 2 is that we'd see things more clearly with a mirror that didn't come right out of a carnival funhouse. I know I've brought the mood down, but before we go, I'll lay my cards on the table. Watch Dogs 2 is still my favorite of the trilogy, and I wouldn't blame anyone for having similar feelings. Its deep narrative flaws don't overshadow the unique and memorable experiences the impressive gameplay provides, or the relentless charm of the cast. You won't regret giving it your time, and it's a brilliant showcase of the often overlooked potential of one of the most interesting IPs on the AAA market. We'll see where that potential goes when we sail across the pond to hack apart London in Watch Dogs Legion when this series returns. Don't worry, we saved you a seat. See you next time.